So I'm going to be mostly focusing on eosinophilic esophagitis. I'll briefly mention eosinophilic gastroenteritis and colitis sort of at the end, because we really have no data whatsoever on eosinophilic gastritis and colitis. It's a big question mark. So eosinophilic esophagitis, to make sure we know, everyone's gone over the diagnosis, but I can tell you, if you do any allergy testing in the general public, you'll get lots of bizarre data. If we test people who have no disease, you'll get positive allergy testing. It's a normal phenomenon. You can get a lot of false positives, so it's really important to know what you're testing for, whether it's eosinophilic esophagitis, whether it's eosinophilic gastroenteritis, or eosinophilic colitis. So why do we want to test for allergies? First of all, does allergies play a role in this disease? I think that's the first question you have to ask. So the answer is, as an allergist, I'm highly biased, so the answer is, I think, is yes. And the answer is based on lots of different evidence. If you look at the definition, the consensus documentation, it says it's an allergy-driven disease. But if you look on who has it, the epidemiology, it really mirrors what we see for asthma, atopic dermatitis, as well as what we call like IgE-mediated food allergy, the highest anaphylaxis. It's a very similar population. It has similar rising over time. The mouse models that Seema mentioned, it's the same models that cause mouse asthma, that causes mouse atopic dermatitis, that causes mouse IgE-mediated food allergies, that causes mouse EOE. It's all the same general mechanism. So there's a similar pathogenesis. In mice, if you knock out one cell, you'll knock out everything else. Everything seems to be very connected. And the treatment, from an allergy standpoint, is very similar, whether it's just treating with, at the end you hear about treating with topical steroids. Topical steroids is the mainstay of treatment for allergic rhinitis, atopic dermatitis, and food allergy, as well as EOE. It's the same treatment. We all treat them the exact same way. You avoid the allergen, and you treat with topical steroids if you can't avoid the allergen. Treatment's the same. So what about pollens? This was an abstract we did many, many years ago. But we see this, we can look on both sides. This is a patient, and we've had a few of them, who is just pollen sensitive. You can take a biopsy of this patient during the pollen season. They had EOE. You took them out of pollen season, their EOE goes away. There was a similar report, actually, for eosinophilic duodenitis, so down in this little lower down, about it in birch pollen season. So you can see it for that as well. We have seen this having just pure EOE. It is rare, but we do have a few patients who are just pollen associated. It's sort of an unusual phenomenon, but it's not uncommon to have pollen plus foods. That's a relatively common thing. So that sort of phenomenon, you can see this is a report actually out of Turkey, where they biopsied patients in and out of pollen season. So the patients with reflux, as we talked before, you can see eosinophils with that during reflux. While allergic rhinitis, these patients just had straight allergic rhinitis, didn't have EOE, and you can see this number of eosinophils in the esophagus went up during pollen season. So that can happen. So it's a real phenomenon. So it's something, and there was Seema mentioned one of our slides, you went through it quickly. You can see increased diagnosis during the pollen season. There's always debate whether that's true and unrelated, but it's probably, clinically we see it all the time. The evidence for all that is not great, but it's something you do truly see. So that's one reason you would want to test. There are good standard testing for aeroallergens. What about foods? Can you test for foods in EOE? And what's the role of foods in EOE? So the roles on foods in EOE comes from stuff originally from the paper from Kevin Kelly and Hugh Sampson. When they put patients on elemental formula, patients all got better. We published a paper 7 years ago by Chris Leocoris at our institution where they put people on elemental formulas. When you put people on elemental formulas, people got better. Symptoms improved in a week, biopsy improved in a month for eosinophilic esophagitis. Less likely true for eosinophilic colitis and eosinophilic gastroenteritis. When we put people on elemental formulas for those two diseases, they don't always improve, which shows to the point that foods may not be a player in that disease. So a lot of our patients on eosinophilic gastritis, I would say less than half improve. Eosinophilic colitis, Some approved, but again, it's much less, and the numbers are very small. Sometimes when you put people on elemental diets for like inflammatory bowel disease, you're giving them bowel rest. So some of that improvement may be just due almost from bowel rest because it's easier to absorb. But foods play less likely role in those two diseases. So the way you would really prove foods play a role is what we call by taking a food, by partially take a food out, it causes disease, you move food, put the food back in, it goes away. And this is one of the questions that someone asked about oral immunotherapy. Can you do oral immunotherapy for foods? Oral immunotherapy is the hottest thing for highest in the anaphylaxis literature. There have been lots of case reports now of works great 80 to 90% of the time. The 10 to 20% that fail, actually fail for two reasons. One, because they can't get them up there, they have too much anaphylaxis. The other reason they fail is because they get eosinophilic esophagitis. So this is a case report. This is sort of a classic one that was seen. It was published in one of the allergy journals in last year about a girl who, someone who had 8 eggs, got hives around 1 year of age, avoided eggs, had a positive allergy testing. At 4 years of age, had an accidental exposure, had anaphylaxis. At 10, went under the new oral immunotherapy where they gave a little bit of egg over time to slowly increase it to build up tolerance, like we do for allergy shots. At 9 months later, able to eat all eggs that they wanted. 3 months later, started complaining of, 9 months later, started complaining of dysphagia, food trouble swallowing, classic eosinophilic esophagitis symptoms. They put them on a PPI to make sure they didn't get the scope. Was in reflux, got a scope, saw it was classic eosinophilic esophagitis. They took egg out, rebiopsied a year later, everything is normal. I can tell you in our hands, we've seen it about 10% of the time. In the literature, it's anywhere from 5 to 20%. This was a recent report published just very recently in 2012 about people who were doing it for milk. It was like 110 children who had eosinophilic, undergone the oral immunotherapy for milk, 3 out of 110, so about a little under 3%. Again, it occurred anywhere from 3 and 14 months. So the standard oral immunotherapy doesn't work. There was a recent publication in a mouse model of eosinophilic esophagitis doing by patch testing. And in that model, they're putting a patch of food on. We'll talk about patch for diagnosis, this is patch for treatment. In that mouse model, they actually were able to get it to cure the eosinophilic esophagitis in a mouse model of food allergy. So how to select the food? So foods clearly cause the role. There's 2 basic ways you can test. One is to guess, and one is to test. So the guess is the diet published by all the work out of Northwestern. It's the 6 food elimination diet. It's been done both in pediatrics and adults. It's the elimination of milk, soy, egg, peanut, tree nuts, fish, and shellfish or seafood. And when they've done that diet, they have great success. About 74% of the children had a complete resolution. And you put people on elemental diets, they had about 88%. In our hands, our success rate on elemental diets are much higher, close to almost near the high 90s. When they took the same bunch of patients and introduced foods back, so these are the patients who do respond, so they're going to respond to one of those foods. The patients who don't respond tend to, at least in our hands, can have multiple food allergies, either have other outside of those 6 foods or have unusual foods, the fruits and vegetables. But mostly, as you can see, it's milk, egg, wheat, and soy. Fish is very unusual. Tree nuts is very unusual. Peanuts are very unusual. And in that cohort, it's mostly one food. Occasionally 2 foods and occasionally 3 foods, but it's mostly one food, and it's primarily milk. In adults, when they looked at it in adults, again, recent publication is about 60, anyway, it depends what your cutoff number is, either 64% or 70% responded to diet, or the 6 food elimination diet, again, showing in adults that it's foods that can cause it. Guessing works pretty well, 64 to 70%. It's not bad. It's not 100%, but foods can cause it. And the most common foods that they were identified so far have been wheat and milk. Similar, soy is, eggs is much less, soy and nuts. But when they did skin testing or allergy testing rarely identified the food, suggesting it's a different mechanism of disease. We have seen this now too, that it's a different mechanism. It's a different type of allergy. There's not the allergy that causes hives. There's a food allergy that causes EOE. It's a different mechanism, so your standard allergy testing doesn't work so well. So when we've looked at, and this is a paper that just came out over the last couple weeks, we looked at our cohort, and we looked at really sort of classified our food allergies by 3 different ways: by biopsy, by classic IgE-mediated reactions, by symptoms, but it's the same foods that the Northwestern groups have found. Milk, egg, soy, wheat, the peanuts, and the other ones start showing up less. So the beef, the chicken, the potato, or the pork are less likely to show up. But those same foods, those top 4 foods, are the major foods that everyone's been finding for food allergy. So how you test for food allergies, there's 2 basic ways of test. There's actually 3 ways to test we'll go over. This is the standard way of testing. This is called skin prick testing or scratch testing. You put a drop of the allergen on the skin, or sometimes you can use the fresh food. You scratch. You get these little, what we call wheels and flares, these little bumps like mosquito bites within 10 minutes. That tells you that you have IgE on the skin. This is testing for IgE-mediated reactions. Works great for hives, anaphylaxis, things along those lines. Doesn't work so well. We'll go over how well it works for eosinophilic, but that's why the test was designed. The other is patch testing. This is what we have done at our institution for many years now. You put the food and fresh porridge on these little chambers. You put it on the back for 48 hours, and you read it 24 hours after that. It was designed originally for contact dermatitis, so the nickel allergy. It was designed for foods and aeroallergens probably almost 60, 70 years ago, used for foods the last 20 years, primarily in Europe for atopic dermatitis. We've been using it now probably close to about 10 years for foods. And this is what you would see in a patient who gets it. You see, there's no positive control. There is a positive control for the IgE-mediated test, which is histamine, which is stuff that makes you sneeze. You get these little bumps. It looks different than contact dermatitis. You get these little bumps. You don't get the big red spots, but you get these little bumps, as you can see for soy and corn up there as well. These little red spots that you do appear. Oh, you can see it here. You get the little red spots here and here. So how good is this test? So this is a paper. This is out of that paper that we just published in JACI, which is the big allergy journal, looking how good the test is. So NPV is negative predicted value. How good is a negative test? So in these patients who we know definitely has food by biopsy, how good is the test? If you're negative to the test, do we know you don't have the food? So you want a test that be high negative value and high positive value. So your negatives are negative and your positives are positives. So your negative predicted test, as you can see, it's really good for almost all the foods in the high 90s, except for milk. Milk is terrible. The test does not identify milk allergy. Okay, so if you're negative on skin test and patch test, you probably don't have EOE to that food. This test is not perfect. Soy and wheat are in the low 90s, high 80s, but pretty good otherwise. Milk doesn't, so except in the milk, a negative is good. A positive, how good is a positive? Positives are pretty bad. So a regular allergy testing for hives and anaphylaxis, the regular allergy testing is about 50% or less. So if we test someone who we know has a history of hives to a food, the positive predictive value of that test being real positive, that you're positive on skin test is going to show disease, it's about 50%. You know the bigger you are, the positive predictive value goes up. But for EOE, the positive predictive value of being positive on skin test or patch test is mediocre or poor. For some foods, it's as low as 17%. It goes up to the 30 to 40% in general, except for milk and wheat. So if you're positive on allergy testing to milk, you definitely have EE or EOE to milk. There's no question about it. So if you're positive on the allergy testing to milk, 80% of the chance you have EOE to the milk. If you're positive to other foods, your odds are anywhere from about a third being allergic to that food. So if you're positive to any other food besides milk, it's about a third of the chance that that test is real.
But you're saying if you're positive to milk.
You really have disease. You probably, I'll go over and so that brings me what. So if it's negative, you probably still have EOE to milk. Right. So what goes up, which goes up. So let me just. I'll go over what we do in a second, and we'll answer that question. So what about specific IgE, which is the blood test, the RAS test, or immunocaps is the other way you do is the blood test. And this is work done out of University of Virginia by Tom Platts-Mills group. And they looked at skin testing, which is the black bar, the hatch bar, which is the blood test, and the gray bar, which is patch test. And this is similar work that they found out of Australia looking at the same thing. In the adults and teenagers, you have less positive patch tests. The skin tests look better. And in their hands, specific IgE was the most sensitive, picking up allergies. Unfortunately, they never went back and figured out if any of these were real or not. They don't know whether these are real or not. In our hands, we find specific IgEs really very unhelpful, honestly. We have had very little success using specific IgEs. So coming up to your question of what do we do? So when we do allergy testing alone, our success rates are just over 50%. If you do the 6-food elimination diet, the success rate, this is going back, knowing kids who we biopsy, we know exactly what food they're on, they're eating everything else. If we know by allergy testing or the 6-food elimination diet, you can guess just as well. Your success rate is about 50% in either hand, okay? If you just take milk out by itself, it's about 30% in our hands. If you take milk, egg, and wheat, it's approaching 50%. If you do sort of our top allergies, milk, soy, egg, and wheat, and the meats, you're in about the mid-70s. If you do the allergy testing and just take milk out, because we ignore our milk, this is clinically what we do now in our institution. We do allergy testing and take milk out no matter what, because I don't believe my milk testing. And once we do that, our success rate is about the same. So that's sort of where we are. I'm going to do a quick question. I know we're going to do panel questions at the end, but you seem very anxious. We do skin and patch. So if you do just skin, your number's probably going to be lower. Patch testing is very time consuming. It is very investigator dependent. You need to know what you're doing. A lot of places don't do it right and don't do it that often. It is, if you have an office that sees EOE once a week, I would tell them don't do it. It's just way too not worth the effort. We see probably 5 to 10 EOE patients a week or more. So we do patch testing every week. We do lots of them. So we have a well-oiled machine to do it. If you don't, it's probably, and even we debate now how worthwhile it's doing, because we know that you can guess just as well. I still like to be a scientist and understand why am I doing it. We need a better allergy testing. It is EOE and is truly an allergic disease, and it's allergen-driven disease, so it makes sense to identify the allergen. Our testing is poor. It doesn't always work. It does not work well for milk. You get a lot of false positives. Our aeroallergen testing is also okay. You miss things, especially in young kids. You can definitely miss things, but it helps along the lines. Allergy testing for EG and EC is even less unclear. Rarely foods cause those diseases. Typically, we don't test in those patients. We can test if someone really wants, we'll test, we'll say, look, hey, if you really want to know if food causes disease, we'll put you on an elemental diet for 4 weeks, see if you get better. If it doesn't work, end of discussion. It's not a food-driven disease. You don't have to worry about it. We need to treat you by what people talked about before, the systemic immunosuppressives or topical immunosuppressives. We don't use those for EG in these. We rarely do foods. Every now and then we'll have a patient, but even then I wonder if that's true or not. So you have to be with all allergy testing, either allergy testing for EOE, EG, or EC, you get a lot of false positives. You get a lot of testing that's not accurate. The negatives help us. So if you're negative, we say, okay, hey, those are the foods we can introduce back in the diet first. So we use our testing more to help guide us what to add back than what to remove at this point. So that's where we'll go from there. I'll leave it up. questions. But I thought we wanted to do most of our questions as a panel, but I can answer a few quick questions. So how often? So there's two questions I think you need to answer. How often you need to do the testing, and how often? So this how often you do allergy testing, how often you do endoscopies, and how often do you do food introductions? I think there's 3 parts to that question. So allergy testing, honestly, we rarely repeat it. We repeat it routinely for IgE made. If someone has highs and anaphylaxis, we repeat the testing every 6 months to a year because we know most of those kids will outgrow it. For EOE, we rarely skin test. We only skin test to see if we can add back foods we're worried about from an IgE mediated standpoint. I don't want to add a food back at home and say, here, try it, and the kid has anaphylaxis. So I wouldn't want to do that. So for the IgE mediated testing, we almost never repeat patch testing anymore. We just don't do it. For biopsies, we repeat it after we do a lot more endoscopies than most other places. We redo endoscopies after we change diet, change medicine. And then when someone's on a stable diet, a stable medicine, we repeat biopsies every once a year to every other year. For food introduction, say we know milk causes the food. When can you retry it again? We will typically retry it every couple years, but honestly, it's different than IgE-mediated food allergies where milk and egg and wheat and milk, people outgrow it 80, 90%. For EOE, it's the other end. It's like the peanut. It's 10%. So it's unusual to outgrow it. We've seen a few, but it's unusual. A couple, I don't know, I know people wanted to take a break, so that's the only quick. We'll do 2 questions, and we'll save the rest of the questions for later. How about that? 2 more questions. I know there was someone over there that had a question. Yes? Yeah. It brings up 2 interesting things. The patients you have, so there's so 15%, if you look through the literature, 15, 20% of the patients have EOE plus an IgE-mediated food allergy, so it's not that uncommon. And you can outgrow one. You can outgrow your IgE-mediated reaction to peanuts, to milk, to egg. We definitely do see that. Interestingly, some of these patients don't get hives to the food, but 2-3 years later, their EOE comes back, and it's due to the food that they outgrew earlier on. So we've definitely seen that happening. How often? Unclear, but it's not, at least at the current time, I don't think it's that uncommon in this set up group. Last question, then we'll leave the rest of the questions for the panel discussion. Chicken, beef, pork, and turkey. And turkey, yeah. Well, so meats. So the question was, when we did 75% success rate, it was milk, egg, soy, wheat, and meats. It's a tough diet. So it's not. A lot of these 6 food elimination diets, these empirical elimination diets, you're taking away 7, 8 foods, the basic staples of your life. You're basically on fruits, vegetables, and beans. And most patients do okay, but we have patients fail that diet too. So we'll stop there because I know they want to do a panel discussion later on.